in my day, we had a nickname for this lecture. We called it the Dignity Lecture, because there's always a certain number of people in the room sitting there with their heads held high, thinking to themselves, I'm here now. That's right. I go to lecture. If this applies to anyone in the room, you are with friends. Trust me. Welcome. The foundation year program was my first class in university. It was the first university class I ever sat in and listened to someone lecture. It was then President Colin Starnes, and he was lecturing on the epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh! You don't know him, that's him all the time. It was a great lecture. I didn't know much at the time, but the point I'm making is that to get to be here now and do this and participate in this way is a great honor. I'm very proud of the program. You in time, you're early now in its early days, and you're very much in the thick of it. You've got orals, you've got another paper, all those things, but I assure you that in the years to come, you'll go on to grad school, you'll go on to do other things, you'll have jobs, you'll meet new people. I can assure you that you will reflect on this year, and you will compare notes with your friends, and you'll come to realize just how unique this program is, and this school is, and this experience. So it's a great honor for me to be here, and I thank you very much. When I was a young man, when I was a teenager, and I was finishing high school, I grew up in a small town in Cape Breton. I had this belief, I don't know if this was something that was given to me or something that I just intuitively thought, but I thought university was a place you went to get a bag of gold coins. I thought that you went and you did whatever it is that you had to do. You read and you study and you do your exams and your practical things, or whatever it is you did. I didn't even know what you did, but I had this sense that when you were done, you got a bag of gold coins, depending on how well you did. If you got an A, you got a big bag of gold coins, and you could use those coins to buy a horse, I don't know, whatever it was you did. If you didn't do that well, if you got a D or a C, you could use those coins, I don't know, you could flip one to the bar staff, or pay a desperate vagabond to kill the king. Whatever it was you needed those coins for, and that's what it was. For me, the foundation year program was a very jarring early introduction to the idea that maybe a university education was about something very different. And that whatever it was you got at the end maybe wasn't something as tangible or something as specific as a bag of gold coins. And when I was asked to do this lecture, and I was thinking a little bit about what I wanted to say, it occurred to me that it's been, I don't know, like 8 years or something since I did my master's, and I look back at that program, and the program has changed dramatically, that program of study. The substance has changed dramatically. This is a read-along lecture. There it is. We clapped for you at the beginning. It's my last day. Anyway, what I was saying, it occurs to me that there have been a lot of changes to that piece of study that I did. Lots of changes, barely recognizable. I graduated from law school about, I don't know, 8 years ago or whatever it was. Lots of changes there. The law has changed. Tons of things have changed. It's internally very, 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 very different. But I look at your reading list, and I look at it, and I read the works, and I read the writers, and And I have to tell you, it really hasn't changed a whole lot in almost 20 years. It's basically the same. So this was actually kind of daunting for me. I thought, what do I say? Let's just do that. Let's just do that. That'll do. Yeah, so it hasn't changed a lot. So I think, what do I say about it? As I was thinking about it, thinking about what to say about it, what to say about this program, it occurred to me that really what I wanted to talk to you about was the exercise of reflecting on what it is you read this year, and what it is you think about it now, and what it is you will think about it. One intuitively thinks that the final lecture of the year is going to be some kind of summary or some kind of gathering together of ideas of whatever course it is that you've taken, or ideally sort of a pedagogical big bang that brings everything together for you when you walk out for the first time not confused. I love that the foundation year program's approach to the final lecture is one that seems to be quite comfortable with the possibility that it will be anything but those things. When Dr. Kern asked me to do it, I think his exact words were, as long as you come in around the 45-50 minute mark, we don't care what you say. He didn't say that. Don't write that down. Don't write that down. So I'm a great lover of stories. As Dr. Fraser said, I do a bit of acting and comedy. I did a lot of acting in Foundation Year program, or the KTS when I was here, and in Foundation Year My oral exams were some of the finest things. King Lear. Oh, it was so good. But I'm a great lover of stories. I think they're very powerful tools for bringing together history, philosophy, persuasion, knowledge, and combining them together into a very strong communication nugget. I'm not alone in thinking this. I mean, you read a lot of things this year. You read things like Hobbes and Machiavelli and Augustine, all these different things. Alongside them on the reading list, you've got Mary Shelley, and you've got Dante, and you've got Shakespeare, and you've got Thomas Mann. So clearly there's something to this. So what I want to do in the time I have with you here today, I want to talk about three stories that in my time had an impact on me. And I want to use those stories to illustrate to you my thesis about reflection and what it means to reflect on the works we've done, and hopefully explain my title, which perhaps brings some was this on the reading list, Roberta, for the monitor? This was on it? This was on it? I should have checked on that first. In 1960, Random House published what was the second book by author Philip Day Eastman. The book was called Are You My Mother? I read this as a young man. I've read it many times since. I should provide a bit of context. I have 5 children, so and that's true. I'm making so I've lived with a lot of books that I've rediscovered books that I read as a child. This is arguably P.D. Eastman's most popular, well-known book, maybe rivaled only by Go Dog, Go. Go Dog, Go. I think that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. One of the great things about children's books is that you don't have to have done the reading. I can tell you the story here in front of you. So, this is a book that begins with a mother bird sitting in a nest with its egg. The mother knows that the egg is about to hatch, and so the mother does intuitively what a mother does when she's about to have a baby. She leaves. She goes to the grocery store. She says, okay, well, baby's going to be hungry. I better go and have something. And of course, the dramatic tension begins when the egg hatches and out pops the baby bird. And the trauma of birth passes very quickly, and the baby bird looks around and goes, oh, where's my mother? And how the bird knows anything about what a mother even is, we don't know. We suspend our disbelief, and there it is. There's the journey. So, the bird goes off quickly to find its mother, but not before first suffering what appears to be a 20-foot drop from the nest to the ground. thus beginning what can only be characterized as the most terrifying and horrifying children's book I've ever read. It only gets worse, trust me. So, the first thing that happens is the bird walks right past his mother. Walks past his mother, doesn't recognize her. This might be one of the most screamed at pages in children's literature, probably. Right? Maybe second only to the Little Red Riding Hood Wolf Grandma debacle, right? Maybe that's on par, we don't know. Walks right past her, and what follows is a series of encounters between the baby bird and other creatures of nature that get more heartbreaking and more intense and sophisticated, I'm going to suggest to you, and I think this is important. So, the first animal that the bird encounters is a cat with yellow eyes. The bird asks the cat, "Are you my mother?" The cat doesn't even answer. The cat just stares blankly back at the baby bird. P.D. Eastman clearly didn't think much of cats. Also noteworthy, I think, is that in addition to not being able to recognize his own mother, the bird is not able to recognize murder when it stares at it. It's a cat! This should be the last page of the book. In the real world, when it ends, right here. This is over. Take notes, Hobbs. Take notes. It's nasty. It's nasty, right? So the bird then meets a hen, asks the hen the particular question. The hen just says, no. Nothing else. The bird goes on, the bird meets a dog. We're getting more sophisticated in the hierarchy of nature here. The bird meets a dog. The dog gets a bit more specific. The dog says, no, I am not your mother. I am a dog. Things should be coming into sharp focus for the bird at this point. There are different animals, all related, right? Then here's where it starts to get interesting. The bird comes upon a cow, and the cow turns it around on the bird. The cow says, no, how could I be your mother? I'm a cow. Clearly trying to draw the bird into an origins debate. The bird is having none of this. The bird is undeterred. The bird has a job to do. I have a mother. I know I do. I'll find her. I will. I will. And here's where the bird gets completely unhinged. If this is a story about, if this is a metaphor for growth and discovery and finding oneself, I'm not saying it is, but if it is, the next part is the bird in its early 20s. The bird goes crazy. The bird starts running. It's not walking anymore. It runs past a dilapidated old car and goes, is that my mother? I can't be my mother. That's crazy. But then the bird comes to the edge of a gorge and looks down and sees a steamboat, an old-timey steamboat, and goes, here I am, mother. Here I am. The boat just keeps on going. And then a crazy thing, what looks like inches above this tiny bird's head, a jetliner roars. The bird looks up and goes, whoa, mother, here I am. This is the closest the bird comes in the story to identifying something that could plausibly be its mother. Right? But disappointingly, the plane doesn't stop and ask any rhetorical questions like the cow did. The plane just keeps on going. Then the bird hits rock bottom. The bird sees this. The bird runs up to this thing, this ugly thing. The bird is clearly desperate. It's an empty vessel at this point. It runs up to this horrible thing and screams, Mother, I'm here! Mother, I found you! This thing is not the bird's mother. No. In fact, this thing is the opposite of the bird's mother. Opposite of the bird. The bird is a tiny, beautiful, pure, innocent, symmetrical, majestic thing. This little example of nature's genius, but this thing is huge and ugly and awful, and it's not an example of nature. It destroys nature. It destroys it with its gross claw, right? But the bird is convinced. The bird is convinced that this is his mother. Now, it's at this point in the story that we should realize, and this is awful, right? This is terrible. At this point, we should realize that this is no mere story about a lost motherless bird. This is a cautionary tale. This is Call of the Cthulhu, right? I mean, this is P.D. Eastman channeling H.P. Lovecraft, and P.D. Eastman is saying, "No, little one, don't go looking for answers. There's only death and horror." The bird realizes this too late. The thing, and it bellows its name out at the bird too. If there's any confusion, it bellows its name. When the bird says, "Oh, mother, I'm here," the thing says, "Snort!" The bird realizes too late that it's made a terrible mistake, and the claw lifts the bird up into the air, very high. The bird is horrified, and the machine is. It almost looks like it's making an offering, right, to its Constructicon god, right? Its king is saying, "I'm swearing an oath of fealty to you, king of gypsum," or whatever. And I offer you this motherless bird. As a side note, I only took a couple of courses with Gordon McHugh, and it ruined my ability to just tell a children's story. I get yelled at home all the time. Just stick to the script, Dad. But then the story takes a turn, and something very unexpected happens. The bird, or the snort, it takes the bird. The bird thinks, this is the end. What is this thing going to do with me? But the snort takes the bird and, with surgical precision, deposits it back in the nest. Back in its nest. And then the mother bird comes along, and there's a delightful reunion. I am your mother. Right? This is probably a bit unrealistic. The unpublished sequel of this book, I think, was Are You My Mother? Was Are You the tree with birds in it that I was sent here to destroy? I did a focus group on this book. I asked my kids what they thought. I asked them what they thought this was about. My 7-year-old, he said, "That bird should not have been talking to those strange animals. That cat would have eaten that bird." That's right. And then he made explosion noises in his mouth. My 11-year-old responded to this suggestion very aggressively. It was like a tutorial. He responded very aggressively. He said, "Ah, Mark, no! Clearly it's a book about protection and security and how only family can give you that kind of love. What is wrong with you?" Not a hint of irony. Not a hint of irony. I was so delighted by that. My 5-year-old girl's response was to cry uncontrollably. I read it to her before. I read it to her, and I said, "Well, Kate, you know this book. You know what it's about. It has a happy ending. What's the matter?" She says, "Everyone was so mean to that bird." You're not supposed to be mean. That's what the book's about. I, of course, very insensitively said, "Oh, Kate, you're full of beans." And she said, "I'm not full of beans, Dad. You know in my heart that I'm full of human bones." My 13-year-old, though, he heard this book a lot. He hadn't read it in a long time. And he clearly hadn't had occasion to think about it. And he did. He didn't say anything for a while. He thought about it for a bit. We talk a lot about stories. And he said, "Well, I think just because you have a name for something you're looking for doesn't mean you know what it is. And I like that one. I like it. I prefer that. All of those views were interesting to me. They were funny, they were interesting, they were valid, notwithstanding my description. I probably first read this book when I was 6 or maybe 7 years old, and I don't think I came back to it again or read it again until I had kids of my own, after I'd come to King's, after I read and learned a bit and grew a little bit more. And honestly, I remember this very clearly. This book stands out for me because for years and years and years, I truly, deeply believed that this book was about what to do if you get lost in the woods. That's true. And I thought the message was very, very clear. I thought, well, everyone knows what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to stay in one spot and wait for someone to find you. And that's it. That's all I thought. This brings me to my second example. Does everyone know this? Does this ring a bell for people? This is Where the Wild Things Are. This was published a few years after Are You My Mother by an author named Morris Sendak. Morris Sendak was born in 1928. He was the son of Jewish immigrant parents. In fact, many of his extended family members died in the Holocaust. This found its way into his work in various ways. He was largely an illustrator for most of his career. But in the 50s, he started writing his own books. And this was one of them, probably his best known book. If Are You My Mother is a story about fear, let's just say for a moment it is, then Where the Wild Things Are, I would think is a story about anger. This is a story about a very, very angry little boy. And he should be angry, the 8-year-old version of myself thought when I read it. He should be angry. Because what did he do? What did this kid do? What are his crimes? Right? He dressed up like the White Wolf from Game of Thrones. Okay. That's the first thing he does. And then what does he do? He makes a clothesline out of face cloths. So what? This mischief of one kind that Max makes, right? He chases the dog with a fork. No evidence that the dog was harmed by the fork. None at all. And what does he do? He says something to his mother. He says, I will eat you up. That's it. He just says it. And what's his punishment? What's his punishment for these crimes against the state? He's sent to his room without supper. Sans nourishment. Right? Oh man, I read this book as a kid and I was incensed. I was so angry. I thought, kid, you are living in Tiananmen Square. Time to bounce! Get out of there! And he does. His room is transformed into a sort of a jungle type environment, and then he sails off in and out of weeks and over a year to this crazy place where the wild things are, sort of an island of Dr. Moreau type place, you know, the amalgam of different creatures, right? It's wonderful. And then what does he do? They try to intimidate him. They roar their terrible roars and gnash their terrible teeth, but then he stares at them, and I don't know, that tricks them into making him their king. And then they have a parade, and what do? They go clubbing at one point, I think. They play Wipeout and all kinds of wonderful things. They do a sort of an hand-style thing. But then he gets tired of them. He gets tired and bored of them, and he does what any authority figure does, from his perspective, He sends them to bed without their supper. That's what he does. But then he becomes very sad because it's lonely at the top, and he realizes that they don't really love him the way that he's loved by somebody else. And so he goes back home. Again, sails in and out of weeks and over a year. He goes back. And he gets home, his supper's there waiting in his room, it's still hot, and I guess you're supposed to understand that this all happened in his head. He didn't actually go anywhere, and the unconditional love of his mother was what led her to bring him his supper eventually, right? Very touching. Clearly that's what happened. Not to me. Not to me. Not to me. That's not what happened in this book. To me, this was a battle of wills. And Max won. Yes! Right? He has to stare down with his mother, and she blinks. She feels bad. She feels guilty for overreacting, for crushing his freedom of speech, and trying to be overly oppressive with him. And so what does he do? He takes off. He goes and rowels with his gang or whatever it is. And she feels bad, and so she, out of guilt, she acquiesces and brings him his supper. Right? Max won. Anti-bourgeois liberalization campaign. 0. Yes! Loved this book. I loved it. I loved how it turned out. Now, I read this book when I was probably 6 or 7. I didn't read it again until I had kids of my own, until I come to things. Lived a little bit, read a little bit. While I was a kid, there were a number of families that I knew that fell apart. Parents divorced. I had a number of kids who were the children of divorced parents. I then became a parent myself, and after a number of years, I came to know friends of mine I'd grown up with who themselves separated, divorced, they had kids. So years and years and years went by, and this came to be just part of the world that I understood, things that I knew. And I had specific examples that I could draw from. I didn't really think about that. I didn't think about this book. My oldest son loves this book. It's one of his favorite books. So we were very, very excited in 2009 when this happened. We were so excited. We were so thrilled. And we eventually got to see it. The basic structure, has anyone seen this movie? Anybody seen this movie? Yeah. Spike Jonze also made the film's adaptation, Being John Malkovich, great movie, screenplay by Dave Andrews. Really, really great film. The basic skeleton of the book is there. They really didn't tinker that much with the skeleton of the book that I described to you, but there are some added elements. Lots of added elements. Max's parents are divorced. He lives in the suburbs with his mother and his sister. A lot of extra things happen to him. He still chases the dog with the fork. He still makes his face cloth clothesline to help with the laundry or whatever it was that he was trying to do, but extra things happen. A snow fort that he's in gets destroyed by his sister's friends while she watches. She doesn't do anything. Doesn't step in, doesn't say anything. And he retaliates by trashing a room and destroying something very special that he gave to her. It's very sad. He goes to school, and we see a scene where the teacher tells the students about how someday the sun will burn out and will disappear and will be gone and all life will end. But it's okay, kids, because we'll all be dead by then. Sleep tight. Sleep tight. He's very bothered by this. His mother has a new boyfriend. She brings him home. He goes home. Things boil. He acts out very aggressively, very violently. He is so much angrier in this movie than I remember him being, and he was so much more rational and clear to me when I read this the first time when I was a kid. And the mother is not the oppressive dictator that she is. In fact, when she tries to stop him from acting out, he doesn't just say he's going to eat her up, he bites her. He bites her really, really hard, and then he runs away. I was jolted by this, because this was one of my stories. This was one of my books, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then he goes off. He still goes. He still sails in and out of weeks and over a year or whatever. And he goes away. And he goes to the same place, and he meets the wild things. These are the saddest Muppets. They're the saddest Muppets. They're so sad. The main one, Carol, which I believe anyway represents how the son sees his father and his relationship with his father, which is not touched on in the book at all. You don't even meet the father. You don't even meet the mother. But Carol is voiced by James Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, for heaven's sake. It is so morose and sad and bothersome. So what goes on after that is a strange, sort of indirect exploration of his psyche, I guess. You all who read Freud, I mean, clearly there's some psychoanalysis going on here, right? So he meets these things, he has adventures with these things, and through his adventures he comes to realize something very interesting. He comes to realize that his mother is not his jailer. She's not the cause of his suffering, but rather she's in it with him. She's stuck in the prison cell with him. And I think the end of the film makes that very clear. Maurice Sendak, the author of the book, also loved this film. He loved it. He was interviewed in Newsweek with Spike Jonze and Dave Eggers, and he was asked, what would you say to parents who might be concerned that this film is a little bit too scary and too disturbing? And he said, completely shamelessly, he said, I tell them to go to hell. You know, come see it. If it ain't working, just leave. Or stay and wet your pants. You can't answer that question. Delightful man. Delightful man. Kept writing and working right up until a few months before his death last year. So he was in this. He loved it. I bawled my eyes out watching this movie. I'm going to be honest right now. My oldest son and I went and saw it, and he thought I was insane. But when we talked about it afterwards, we talked about it at length, and I think he got it. We talked about it for days and days and days. So again, I'll remind you, if you asked me at 8 years old what I thought this whole thing was about, I would have said, man, this is about sticking with the man. That's what this book is about. This book is about how sometimes the dark side, because that's what I would have called it at 8 years old, the dark side yields and the good guys win. That's what I would have said. I didn't know the term police state, but I probably would have used it if I known. But now I've gotten older, I've seen this, thought about it a little bit more. I just think it's about something far more interesting, and I can't go back. I can't go back to thinking about it the same way as I did for so many years. In fact, I can barely read this book out loud anymore. My kids will attest to that. This brings me to my third and final example. Isn't it cute? Isn't it wonderful? Mr. Snuffleups was introduced to the show Sesame Street, I think on its third season, around the year 1972, give or take, something like that. Sesame Street, when it was first created, it was not... You did Marshall McLuhan. Did you Marshall McLuhan? Yeah. Sesame Street, when it was first introduced, was not just meant to be just a kid's show, just a kid's entertainment show. There were specific educational goals in mind. They had certain things they were trying to do. They had formative research they were trying to incorporate. They were trying to harness what they considered to be the addictive power of television, which was a very new idea back then, and try to use that, particularly with pre-kindergarten children, particularly underprivileged, inner-city children who could not afford to do daycare or programs or anything like that. But they all had everybody had televisions in their home by that time. So they thought, well, let's try and do something about this. Let's create this show that does this thing. Well, initially the show focused almost exclusively, really just at the very beginning, on what? Letters, numbers, basic arithmetic, words, colors, very rudimentary type, educational type things. They very quickly started creating plots and characters that could illustrate social realities that kids would be experiencing, that they were experiencing or would come to experience. So, you know, if you really read into it, The Count is an early introduction to OCD. I'm being a bit facetious. Like the Cookie Monster clearly has an eating disorder. Clearly does. And I'm only half joking because the show actually dealt with some very serious things. When an actor playing a major character died in 1982, the show devoted an entire episode to death. Again, their demographic was what? 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. They devoted an entire episode to. When another actor became pregnant, they devoted an entire episode to what pregnancy is, what it means, what does it mean for relationships and the people around you. They took this stuff very, very seriously. My favorite character was Super Grover, because I loved Grover and I loved Superman, and this was together. And I love that the most waifish, insecure character was a superhero. I love, now maybe Kermit is the most waifish. Oh no, he has leadership skills. So Snuffleupagus was first introduced in the 1970s. A few basic facts. He's 4 years old. He still gets called Mr. So that's very respectful. So he's 4 years old. His first name is Aloysius. He has a sister named Alice. His favorite foods are cabbage and spaghetti. He drinks sassafras tea. But the main rub is that only Big Bird can see this guy, right? Only Big Bird can see Mr. Snuffleupagus originally, or maybe, put it a bit more fairly, only Big Bird has occasion to see Mr. Snuffleupagus. We don't know in the early years, is he real or is he not real? Is he part of Big Bird's imagination, or is this actual real character that suffers comedy growth? Early on is probably for the best that only Big Bird could see. They sat around in committee and they decided, let's take the dead eyes of an anaconda snake. We'll put it on a tuskless woolly mammoth. The kids will love that. They'll love it. And the voice, Mr. Snuffleupagus is actually quite nice and soothing now if you listen to him. Early on it was like they took Eeyore and combined it with Leonard Cohen and sedated him like worst imaginary friend ever. I set this up on purpose. Let's go back to this. And that's what he was. That's what Mr. Snuffleupagus was meant to be initially. Mr. Snuffleupagus was meant to introduce to children the idea. They knew that many children had imaginary friends, and they wanted to introduce this idea that this is a normal thing that you have. There may be grown-ups that don't see your imaginary friend or believe, but it's okay because this character that you love, that you relate to, Big Bird, Hal also has an imaginary friend. So that was the idea. That was the goal. I loved Sesame Street as a kid. It was one of my favorite stories, but I absolutely hated this story. I hated this plot. Because what would happen is that, Mr. Snuffleupagus would be there, the grown-ups would come, Mr. Snuffleupagus would find a reason to leave, Big Bird would say, you just missed him, and they would say, missed who, Big Bird? Right. And it was sort of a series of Three's Company style misunderstandings. I hated it. It was just injustice at every turn. I couldn't even put my finger on why I hated it. Either Big Bird was delusional, or at best he had sort of a Fight Club-esque alter ego that blamed all of his misadventures on, or worse, that the grown-ups were willfully blind jerks, just jerks. They couldn't stick around for an extra 5 minutes, or Snuffleupagus couldn't stick around for an extra 5 minutes. I don't know who I was more angry at, but I was angry I really hated this storyline for so long. But then in 1985, almost 15 years after this whole thing started, 15 years of this, you thought Lost was 15 years. They decided to officially unveil Mr. Snuffleupagus. I had sort of grown out of Sesame Street by this time, but this happened. I was 11 or something, but this captured my attention. I heard about this, news reached me, and I was excited. I don't think I saw the show, but I saw it in a rerun at some point, and I was so excited to see this. I knew it was coming, and they did it in fairly dramatic fashion. Big Bird thought he tricked the grown-ups into coming and getting some free food. Right. But then just as they were about to show up, Mr. Snuffleupagus had to go tell his mom because he was so excited, so he left, and then the grown-ups came and they cussed Big Bird out for the 1,000th time, right? And then they leave, and then he comes back and he tries again, and then Mr. Snuffleupagus says he's got to go brush his teeth. I'm raging at this point. Get to it! But then Elmo saves the day, right? As Elmo does. Elmo wraps his arms around Mr. Snuffleupagus' arm, holding Mr. Snuffleupagus in place so he can't leave. The grown-ups come. They see Mr. Snuffleupagus. It's this huge revelation. And Big Bird has an I told you so speech. And then the grown-ups have I'm so sorry Big Bird speeches. And then, in what is really the critical moment of the end of this long, long, long plot, one of the longest running adult human characters, says to Big Bird, "Big Bird, from now on, we will believe everything you say." We will believe everything you say. I was a bit confused by this, but it was justice. It was sweet justice, right? As a kid, a little kid in me. This wasn't just a wild thing in Big Bird's imagination. This is a real thing. This is a real character. Now the grown-ups see it, and he sees it, and now everyone can be friends. Right? In 1998, a book was published called Sesame Street Unpaved, and it went into some of the behind-the-scenes stuff about the stories of the show that maybe people didn't know about. It was written by a guy who was very passionate about Sesame Street, David Orknight, and he explained that Mr. Snuffleups, I read this book, he explained that Mr. Snuffleups was revealed for two main reasons. The minor of the two main reasons being that they sort of run out of stuff to do with him. The plot had run dry. After 15 years, yeah, I think it probably would. But the second reason was actually a bit harder to spot from the road. See, in 1985, 1984, 1985, New York State prosecutors began investigating a series of allegations that children were being abused in Bronx daycares. And eventually 5 men were arrested. 5 men were convicted. This was happening all over the United States, by the way. There were high-profile cases in California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Florida. It was happening all over the place. There was a bit of a hysteria about it. A lot of people were convicted. A lot of children had to testify. Young children had to testify. A lot of those convictions were overturned on appeal because that testimony was considered to be it was unreliable testimony. This really moved the law of children being involved in criminal cases forward quite a bit at the time. There was a huge number of high-profile series of cases. And what I couldn't have known when I saw this show was that there was a debate going on in living rooms and in churches and in schools among adults responsible for children. And that debate was, when do you believe what a child tells you? And what should you believe and not believe? And the writers and producers of Sesame Street were alive to this. And they started to become very, very concerned that this character that they created, this character that was intended to be about nothing more than imaginary friends, was maybe sending a very dangerous message to kids. That message being, yeah, sometimes grown-ups won't believe you. And maybe they won't believe you for a long, long time, depending on what the story is. And so the decision was made to draw him. I was very troubled by this when I read it. I was troubled by the fact that I had no idea when I was watching this and caught up in it and angry about it. I had no idea that this character was playing out dueling anxieties and priorities for education. I had no idea. That was completely lost on me. And I was troubled by the fact that when he was unveiled, I was so excited. I was so excited because justice had been served for these characters. Like it matters, but I was excited. I had no idea. No idea that this stuff was going on. It was just a joke that I didn't get. It was a gag I didn't get. I didn't find it funny that no one knew that he existed. It was just a gag. I didn't get it. But now I'm older. And I'm different now. And so I can't look at this character the same way. Again, I can't think about it the same way. I'm changed because of what I've learned and what I know. So this brings me back to my central predicament here. What do I say to you that has any bearing on the foundation year program? Well, if I'm talking about reflection on what you've learned and what you know and what you've experienced, I guess what I'm saying to you is that I can't just think about, and much less tell you about, let's say, a story about a lost motherless bird without invoking a Greek titan, you know, or or some other mythology. I can't do it. I can't do it without seeing it through the eyes of my kids. I can no longer do it. No longer do it. I can't talk to you about a book like Where the Wild Things Are without considering the context that I've grown up through, without thinking about without seeing a reinterpretation of that story, hearing someone else tell that story in a different way, and having learned what I've learned and seen what I've seen in the people that I know and the other education that I've had. I can't do it. I can't talk to you about a childhood character that meant a lot to me at one point for negative reasons, but I can't think about it or talk to it without considering the broader context. And the little boy that maybe at one time could tell you about these things very genuinely, in a very specific way, that little boy no longer exists. He's gone. I can't rechannel him. I can't recreate him for you. And I think what I would suggest to you is that you in time will come, you already do, but in time you'll come to feel this way about the things you've read this year, and the works that you've done and the works you've considered. You will rethink entire philosophies and modes of thought. Good luck talking about God, or the existence of God on a go forward without invoking Descartes. Good luck. Good luck. You probably won't be able to do it. You may go back and you'll read individual paragraphs or individual passages that really nailed you this year, that really hit you, that you really thought about, and you'll read them and go, maybe that doesn't mean what I thought it meant. I remember that differently. Right? It may be an individual sentence that struck you. Maybe a sentence like that one. Right? Maybe when you first read that, you thought to yourself, oh, well, that's a provocative joke, right? We'll take these books, we'll put them on our shelves, we will think about them again. In so doing, maybe you thought that the author was putting an emphasis on these words, these books. You will never read these books again. You'll read other books, but you'll never read these books again. And I wouldn't blame you for that. That's intuitive. But maybe in a bit of time, having grown, even over the course of a lecture, I don't know, you may come to consider that maybe the author meant to emphasize that. You will never read these books again. By which I mean that after this year, when you have other experiences and you go on and you do other things and have other education, the you that read these books this year won't exist anymore. It won't be you. There'll be some version of you. And so, what I really want to say is that even though the works, the titles, the authors, the writers, the debates, the questions, the essay questions, whatever they are, they will change over time. You will change over time. And one of the things I've considered over the years is that maybe it doesn't just happen once. Maybe there are many different versions of you that breach the mouth of Plato's cave as you go forward in time. Thank you.